we have 23. I'm tempted to wait until 25. 25 sounds like a nice number.
Yep.
Okay, I think we'll start because it's now 6 minutes past and we assume that people will join us. So, yeah, just welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those of us on the Asian side of the world. And I'd like to say a particular good morning to Alex, for whom it's 6 a.m. in the morning. So, Alex, we're very glad that sorry you had a bad night in terms of not, being concerned about waking up, but we're very glad you did, and you did wake up. So thanks so much. And at 6 a.m. we have to say is probably beyond the call of duty, but we are most grateful. So I'd like to welcome just everybody onto the webinar this today. We're really excited to have everyone on the call and to introduce Alex Kruger. Some of you may know Alex, although many of you may have come into contact with Alex and Child Frontiers in the course of your work. I'd just like to start by saying how much I value the input of Child Frontiers in relation to our work. It's meant that Alex, the amount of work that Alex has done with us in terms of the evaluations that he's actually been involved in, and the evaluations that other Child Frontiers members and staff have been involved in, has meant that he comes to this webinar with a great deal of experience and knowledge of our work on the ground. So that makes it all the more valuable. Just most recently, however, I dragged Alex and Vimala to China, and we worked together on working out how to and considering how to support the Ministry of Civil Affairs in China to establish the national child protection system there. So Alex has been at the forefront of a lot of work and learning on child protection systems and contributing to the international strategic shift to this systems approach. So all of this means that I think we're in for a very interesting and challenging presentation, and it will challenge us to take the lessons that have been learned into account and to move forward with increased awareness about all the elements we need to consider. So Alex, can I invite you to make a start, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sure. Thank you very much, and good to meet you all around this webinar this morning for me, and good evening for all those who are on the other side of the planet. Yes, it has been very interesting, I have to say, collaborating with Save the Children. And one of the considerations before starting, even, I would say Save the Children has been one of the very few organizations that actually took the initiative to, at least with us, to actively try to explore and understand better how things are going on system strengthening programming. And this started quite a bit of the reflection on how things could be done differently. And this is a reflection that I'm going to share here with you. It has been started with Save the Children, of course, a couple of years ago, thanks to the evaluations and reviews of programs we have done. But it is not a common process, I have to say, among different international agencies. So I have to say, we are also in Child Frontiers, we are grateful to Save the Children because this collaboration pushes our thinking, and I believe that it is a very useful exercise every time to progress in our reflection. So I would really invite everyone to note down some of the questions, and we collect those, and we will try to address some of the doubts and clarifications at the end. So we can now probably begin with the first slide. Sylvia. Right. Most of you, I believe, have been involved in the previous webinar, where the findings and considerations from the review of child protection system supporting programs for Save the Children Australia and Save the Children Norway have been presented. And this webinar really aims at building on those discussions and on that perspective, considering though that we are able to expand a little bit the perspective and the understanding of the situation, as me personally and Child Frontiers team has been exposed in the last 10 years over many different situations. We have been collaborating with the biggest and some of the small international organizations working on child protection systems, and we've done so in different contexts, which means humanitarian settings as well as developing settings, and in different countries and continents. So we've been exposed to a wide variation of experiences and approaches, and so the ideas and observations I share with you are really based on this wide spectrum of exposure, and is not only simply on Save the Children 2 reviews that we have considered last time. What we are going to look at really is a critical analysis of the international child protection practice and approaches. I have to say that the points I'm going to raise during this presentation are really common to most of the organizations, and we know, and you are probably aware, where UNICEF is positioning itself in terms of child protection system strengthening. Lately, there is that shift more going back to issues, and whilst a lot of the reflection, a lot of the learning of what has been happening on supporting child protection systems probably hasn't been fully uncovered and fully considered. But UNICEF is really grappling, for example, on at the level of policies or national plan of action at the central level with governments, and the changes they've been able to achieve or to show have been really elusive at times, and some successes, but a lot of material to learn from also in that situation. Plan International, for example, is also focusing on at the community level, similarly to Save the Children, but more specifically in setting up a community child protection mechanism at the community level. But they have the big challenge, as well as for World Vision in a similar position, and for some of Save the Children programs, the big challenge of seeing how do the community-based child protection mechanism link to the national overall system. I think there is a general situation among international organizations where we all struggle really with a solid theory of change when we talk about child protection systems and child protection system strengthening or development. And some of those theories of change that we came across through reviews and evaluations and technical assistance on programs are sometimes fairly shaky, and sometimes are not fully complete. But let's see what we are going to look at during this presentation. Next slide. Yes, we are here. So I will present 3 main points of a critique of system strengthening efforts. There is an article that hasn't been published yet that was presented at Calgary ISPCAN International Meeting in last year, which was co-authored with other 4 people who shared some of the concerns or some of the learning and observation about how the child protection system strengthening practice has been taken on in the last 8 years or 9 years of experience, and how much certain programs have contributed to the development of that practice, but how much also some of the strategies have gone into a direction that in many begin to feel probably is not the most effective and appropriate one. We will review then what we know. So I will share some of the considerations based really on the evaluation and the evidence we have. I will not go in much of the details in this presentation because we will not have much of the time. I hope you have been exposed to some of the work that we did, but also some of the work of other agencies. You should be familiar with the reviews of the programs of Save the Children already. And what I was asked also to do is try to identify by the end some of the consideration that we want to take on to continue working on child protection systems and to strengthen those in a way that is appropriate and in a way that is really effective so that we can see some changes and positive impact on children's and family lives. Next slide, please. Now, where we are having the discussion is because not only there has been something like 10 years of the big shift in terms of strategies to child protection internationally, and that according to us is probably the biggest meaningful shift since the launch of the CRC. But we are also in these years, we're the last 2 years, we are really at a critical point for child protection international setting, with the introduction and the commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the 16.2 goal on ending abuse, exploitation, and trafficking and all forms of violence on children. There is, with this new emphasis on the Sustainable Development Goals, an attempt to really bring global strategies and global approaches to national realities in a way that is more predictable and more efficient, and above all, that suggests the use of strategies that are based on evidence, which is all very interesting and very very useful, but we felt that this shift into clear global strategies could be accompanied, that could be improved if we really look at our collective experience and our learning in these last 10 years in supporting the development of child protection systems. There was a real reason why the organizations globally shifted from issue-based programming into a systems approach, with a lot of ambiguity, if you want, throughout this decade on conceptually around child protection systems, and with a bigger ambiguity, I guess, also in programming terms, but the real motivations that were behind the shift to child protection systems, I think, are still valid. And those are elements that really emerge from any review with any organizations, but clearly strongly came out with the reviews with Save the Children, that the entire staff believe that and perceive the approach, a systemic approach to child protection, to be really beneficial and giving many more opportunities to actually have a positive impact on life of children and families. Now, we are not able, and we are not always in a position to show clearly that there is a positive impact. So I think there is a lot to learn, and there is a lot that of that experience of this past decade we must take into account in order to really progress into the new era of the Sustainable Development Goals, whether we apply it to improving national child protection systems or working on specific issues around child protection. the risk we are incurring is still of having a gap between policies and strategies at the global level and what happens at the programs in every single country or in specific situation in the communities, where we have very lofty ambitions and very noble motivations and policies and strategies, but there is a major gap in trying to contextualize those and make them a reality into the countries where we work. Next slide, please. And here we come to the three main points. There are many others, of course, but I think that probably these three main points summarize the biggest challenges and critiques that have been brought to the attention of practitioners and organizations around the globe on how child protection works, and specifically around the child protection system discourse. The main critique, and the first one, is the tendency to apply models or blueprints. Now, this is, and you will find in the presentation, those who know me probably are used to this, the language is fairly black and white, if you want, like the presentation, but there are many nuances in this. So when I talk about models and blueprints, it's probably not literally the case, but we are referring to a fairly consistent way of looking at things and a fairly consistent standardized set of interventions in child protection that belong to one way of understanding child protection practice. So in the article that I mentioned at the beginning, we did refer to some models and some blueprints, and many other practitioners and scholars are recognizing that there is a conscious or unconscious tendency to propose some of the models that are generally speaking applied in the developed countries or the affluent countries and societies into situations of development or even humanitarian settings. This is the first big point. We will see those three critiques in details in the coming slides. The second point is about is a bit of the consequence of applying models or blueprints, is the fact that programs and work on system, despite the fact that internationally all organizations put a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort in explaining that all the strategies and all the programs need to be contextualized into the national realities, into the community realities, into the sociocultural situations. Actually, the local context is really one of the aspects which represented the biggest struggle and a huge challenge for most programs, I would say, across every agency. This also is linked to the last point, where in many programs and in many of the so-called improved system or developed systems or models that we have been trying to promote in the last 10 years, there is clearly an inadequate understanding of what is the concept, how people understand childhood, how people would define childhood, how people would define families, communities, and what their roles are in relation to child well-being or child protection. These are clearly not the same everywhere around the world. They are sometimes dramatically different, and they do have a bearing on, of course, on the social dynamics, but also they do have a bearing on the kind of system that might be represented as more appropriate or effective. Next slide, please. Now, Then we are looking now at the specific critique of using blueprints or models, or if you prefer, simply fairly standardized programs choices or standardized elements of systems. We see that across agencies there is a fairly consistent definition of what constitutes systems, and generally focuses on its physical or observable elements, the most apparent elements. It doesn't really, the description of those systems don't really go into the invisible aspects of the content of a system. And what I'm talking about are the issues of normative frameworks and values and principles that really motivate and inform the life of individuals in a given context. But the tendency to apply standardized approaches with an implicit use of models, you can, if you are familiar with many different, the classification of different systems that work on child maltreatment, then you might be able to recognize most of these elements being belonging to an Anglo-American tradition of how to deal and how to understand child protection. And these are the elements that are proposed over and over again in many different contexts. Now, we can absolutely agree that in many cases, these models are replicated or proposed in an implicit way. Programs and managers and practitioners, as I did in my experience up to when I was with UNICEF, when we started discussing about systems and so on, I was really a big supporter of exporting a specific model. And in fact, one of the first big checklists was a fruit of my efforts. And I had the opportunity and the luck, maybe, to see also the damage that checklist that I produced has been doing around the countries in Southeast Asia. And that sparked a lot of reflection and pushed me and other colleagues to consider what can be done differently. Standardized way of working, you can see as, for example, some elements that we normally look at that seem to be the essential part of system, like social work, and social work as being the only crucial element of any national child protection system, or case management as being an essential approach. However, this is also the case in situations where case management is not supported by functioning services or sufficient human resources, or even any social workers, and therefore relying on para-social workers or human resources that are not particularly, they look like social workers, but they're not really. Other elements of a standardized understanding or a standardized way of looking at child protection is the importance we put on reporting criminal investigation or reporting cases of child protection to the police as the first and most important aspect of the entire child protection approach. And similarly, also the great focus on community-based child protection mechanism, which seems to be omnipresent in programs across the world, with different emphasis and different priorities, but they're very, very common. These are all standardized ways of working that raise a series of questions, whether they are appropriate for the context, whether they are even realistic for the context, and whether they are plausible. Appropriate in terms of considering whether those approaches or some other specific solutions that we propose, such as positive parenting, are really the the need, or they correspond to the requests or the priorities of communities, parents, and children. And whether the language we use, whether the paradigm of services organization that we propose do really make sense to the end users, like children and families, or whether they are even compatible with the organization, the institutional organization of different national institutions or local institutions. When we talk about realistic aspects of whether these standardized approaches are realistic, we talk about the intersection between the human resources, the quantity of human resources, their capacities, and the availability of additional financial and financial resources. Some of the models we've been reviewing are really not very realistic because they're piloted intensively in a given community, or let's say in the classical 6 sites that some of the national programs work in. So take 6 communities in a given country and are intensively supported with substantial capacity building, with substantial injection of resources in terms of capacities and capability to work with the transportation means, whether those are bikes or motorbikes and other support resources. But if you consider that injection of resources, that injection of support, and you try to imagine the scalability of that effort in 6 communities, and you look at the national level, how many communities like those exist in a given nation, then a quick run through the numbers would immediately tell us that probably what we are doing is not the most efficient and appropriate way, and is definitely not realistic. Some programs, I remember this was a bit of a surprising element of the findings of the reviews with Save the Children. There was one program which was giving fairly interesting and encouraging results on the ground in communities, but we were at the point where estimating the rollout of that approach nationally would take something like 900 years at the sustained effort of that program. And which brings up the combination of appropriate, how much those approaches are appropriate to the context and how realistic they are, bring up a big consideration that is about plausibility. Are we really working with approaches and with solutions that are plausible, that are going to be ever implemented in a given country? The big challenge is that a lot of those components are copied simply from one country to another. There is a big distinction I would like to make here, and probably this will be reflected in the conclusions as well, between having a common strategy that informs our programming across different countries and situations, and having common solutions. They're 2 dramatically different things, but many of those approaches have become the actual objective of many of the programs. So from developing contextualized systems or promoting a more consistent way of working, we ended up creating more standardized solutions, and we are in a more and more difficult position in contextualizing what we're trying to do. This means that we have been focusing more on the form rather than the function. So we've been replicating case management processes, for example, in many, many different contexts. And what we take is, okay, this case management process has been working very well in a given program. Then take in Zimbabwe, that was perceived as a success story. Is great. A huge amount of effort and resources goes into that. And then other programs begin to replicating very, very similar interventions and responses without clearly and critically understanding what is behind that process, if it really works, why it does work in that context. We tend to replicate the mechanics of things, but not really looking at what is the function that they're playing. Because it's the function that really connects different elements of a system and it's not the mechanics. The most dangerous assumption, I think, of our programs that we observe across organization is this idea that is never been proven, that exporting the form or the appearance or the shape of certain services, they will function equally in different contexts. This is clearly not the reality. We have a lot of ministries, for example, that look alike. We have a lot of institutions that have been recreated with the same name, with the same structures, with the same objectives, with the same participants, over and over again. Think about the child protection committees at the community level. However, they officially, we can quite often say, well, they don't work. They don't achieve what they're supposed to achieve. Yet we still do it because we are really replacing the institution or the establishment of, for example, these committees as our objective, rather than looking at the function that those committees could perform at the community level, and whether a committee is even needed in a given community, or somebody else of some existing structure could easily take on or is already playing part of those functions. And the function being promoting child well-being and ensuring that there is no sustained harm or maltreatment on children. So we have been promoting in the last 10 years, in the effort of supporting child protection systems, an increased number of standards, an increased number of guidelines and checklists. And I was part of that, absolutely. I can say I've done my part. But these are no longer reference tools as they should be. The guidelines or some of the tools should be really a reference to say, okay, this has been working in certain circumstances. How do I learn from that to really make sure that we do something appropriate in my context or in this country? So the programming has become much more compliance driven. This is one of the learning that I think is particularly urgent to consider and to have a further reflection, if you want. This is not the elements I'm throwing at you really are just superficial elements. There is much more to understand in here, but I think this is extremely important for the fact that we are going into global strategies for the Sustainable Development Goals without having fully unpacked this compliance-driven programming that on one side might respond to donors, on the other side, it is much easier for us because we know what we're going to do regardless of where we work. But we need to be honest and we need to be very critical with what we do. There is a role of international organizations in trying to promote a critical look and an improved practice in child protection globally. So we need to be honest also when things don't really go according to plans and when we fail. Next slide, please. The second critique was about the little appearance of local context, or despite the fact that all strategies across all organizations and all programs everywhere and every proposals, we talk about contextualizations. And this doesn't really happen. Most often is about adaptation or window dressing, tweaking, where we adapt terminology, we adapt the images, the colors, even in the presentations, we just change the pictures with different kind of kids and geographical names. But the contextualization has many more deeper aspects that we have to consider. So I think the big challenge for the international approaches on international strategies is really to see how can we make room for adaptation and contextualization of those. I'm saying this simply because we're all trying hard, but if we look, it was super apparent in the review for your programs. Just to give an example that is more familiar to you, the programs between Zimbabwe or Mozambique or Uganda, Nepal, and Cambodia supporting child protection system were basically identical. And now it's very hard to imagine that the context of Uganda, Nepal, and Cambodia, institutionally, politically, socially, and culturally, are that similar that justify those very striking similarities in programs. Programs in the reality are not really tackling and dealing with the contextual issues. This is something that, how to say, I don't know if it resonates with you, but if you think about, you look at the contextual situation or the situation analysis that is done prior to big projects and big proposals, or why we want to support a child protection system in a given country. There are some analyses that are only looking at child protection issues. And it's very difficult then to translate that into an institutional reform or into an improved system, because there is no real analysis on what are the institutional challenges and what are the bottlenecks in the services organization paradigm in that given country. But when we look at some of those analyses that do include the institutional limitations in a given country, we tendentially know that there is an issue of limited resources. So in most of the situation analysis in developing countries of programs to strengthen child protection systems are looking at a dramatic shortfall of resources, above all human resources and financial resources. So programs are not financially viable, the national programs and so on, and they depend on donors. They do have issues of sustainability, but also of how many aspects are covered by the donors' priorities and the financial resources they propose. The human resources, as I said, are very limited in numbers, but also in quality. So we are talking about very limited capacities. And then the common traits that we see in programs analysis, that there is very limited political commitments. Now, then there is a program design phase. There is all a theory of change. We want to strengthen the system, and then we implement the program. And when we get to evaluate those programs, we find out that a lot of the objectives are only partially met, which is fine. I mean, child protection system strengthening is an effort that is very long term. But some of the objectives are really not particularly met, because the reasons for not meeting those objectives are the same reasons that we described in the situation analysis. So we do have a problem there. We have a problem of logic in programming, where our system strengthening effort is not tackling the real underlying system failures, which are about resources, capacity, and political commitments. If those are identified as problems, our programs need to deal with those problems. We cannot ignore them. And if we are not able to deal with those things, then we should try to understand what can we do, rather than pretending that everything will be fine and there will be an unbelievable and probably not plausible change in spirit, economic fortune of a given country, and investment in the social welfare sector. This all comes to, can be captured by a sentence that is at the end of the slide. Our challenge in adapting to the local context is really represented by mostly what programming and managers and frontline workers in our organizations, what we have been doing for a long time is trying to see how can we shape the communities, how can we shape this government, how can we shape this ministry to accommodate our model and to accommodate and to fit how we look at things rather than the opposite. I think we need to make an effort. Of course, organizations try to understand the local context and are doing great efforts, great strides into contextualizing. This is a bit of an extreme case or sentence, but we need to be very consistent and systematic in doing, in making an effort and making sure that this is happening at the national level as well as the local level as well as the family level, that we do respect what the perspective and the understanding of things are from communities and families. There is one aspect. Am I going too slow? Probably yes. There is one aspect that is constantly coming up, is that in many programs we see that we are educating communities in what child protection is. And that to me is a very clear indicator that there is something that's gone wrong. In all the research we have done as Child Frontiers, and if you look at the literature that there is there in academic circles, most communities and most societies around the world do care about the children, and they do take care of them, and they don't deny maltreatment of children. It is a problem for everyone. They frame these problems in a very, very different way. The fact that they don't talk about child protection, they don't frame things in terms of child abuse, is our challenge to try to understand how they frame the problem in their own terms and what their priorities and the challenges that they're experiencing. If we find ourselves teaching them what child abuse is, then is our failure in understanding what they conceptualize as the problem being. Next slide, please. And in fact, we come to the concepts of child, family, community. What is really at the heart of the conceptualization is this centrality of children and the families and sometimes the communities into the whole discourse of the child protection systems. Children and family have gone slowly into the back burner. Again, not officially, but the practice of programs on the ground tend to confirm across organizations that the voice of children, the perspective of children and their families is not the main concern of child protection system strengthening efforts. You will see there is a little star next to families. That is to remind me that maybe you have been surprised so far that I keep on talking about children and families. But we see that in most contexts where we work in developing countries, there is, as it is also in affluent societies, the family is central to everything we want to do with children and for children. In our child protection practice internationally, the family has been isolated in ways that some of the organizations, smaller organizations if you want, but organizations that we keep on working with in developing countries, they tend to conceptualize families as the source of the problem of child protection. Of course they are. But that negative depicting of families or conceptualizing families as only potential abusing elements has isolated the child in our child protection practice. So we only look at the child. We seldom link child and family in our conscious efforts to support child protection systems and improve child protection services or support to children. And we often systematically forget about the family. To help the child means helping the family and making sure that the positive and supporting elements in that family are there with the child to make sure that things are fine. And this is across agencies, for UNICEF, is for Plan, it is for World Vision, it is probably the case, and you will tell me at the end if you found being the case for you as well in your programs. One aspect that is important is that the concept of childhood and what it means to be a child and what are my obligations as a child in relation to the family beyond my own recognized rights, and what is the link between the child and the family, and what is the interrelationship between families and community, need to be absolutely understood, because these are the very core concepts that inform the shape of a national system or of a community system. We have been too long, I believe, working with the conviction and with the belief that a child is a child everywhere in the same way, and that a family is a family everywhere in the same way, and that societies function in the same way like the society where we live. Clearly, this is not the case. Clearly, a family in Lagos is very different than a family in London. Or a family in rural Nepal is very different from a family in Washington. They relate to the state, they relate to the community, they relate to their children in different ways. And this means that most probably the help that they can receive or they need is probably very different.
Alex, yes. Sorry to come in. I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I don't want to lose people. So, yeah, thank you.
I will rush through. This is also a problem on trying to understand child protection. I refer to the issue that we apply a one way of looking at child protection and understanding child protection. It stems from an Anglo-American tradition of understanding child maltreatment, but there are potentially very varied, very different ways of understanding issues around child maltreatment. And we need to be able to understand those, what communities understand as being child maltreatment, what is the problem, what are the problems that they do agree with everyone else that shouldn't be happening and need to be dealt with, and where do they meet their limits in dealing with those problems. So the problem should be conceptualized by communities or by the national context, and shouldn't be just immediately transferable from our international concept of child protection. And this goes with the roles and responsibilities. Who is supposed to do what really depends on the concepts of families and communities and how they relate to the state. If we consider a national child protection system, the laws and the policies that inform the way child protection services are provided, they come down to a basic understanding of what is the relationship between the citizen and the state, the individual and the family and the state. And this needs to be understood in every single context. In some situation, the communities don't expect the state or the central government to play any role in the welfare and the well-being of children or in the welfare of the families. And this makes a tremendous, substantial implication on what we can propose and what we can expect as being a functioning system. Some clarification. Next slide, please. I think this is important that we do reflect upon, and we begin working on as individuals and as organizations, our perspective and our baggage. This refers to all I've said so far. What is our understanding of the issues? What is our understanding and frame and definition of problems, and how we understand the way of dealing with child maltreatment? Needs to be a conscious understanding of what is our perspective, and that if we are conscious about it, we are able then to respect and begin to explore other perspectives in communities and in other cultural and social settings. The other point of question is the assumption of linear change. A lot of the work, I referred this very little so far in this discussion, a lot of the work on child protection system has been focusing only on specific elements or specific part of the system, with the assumption that it's, as we're working on a system, we will inevitably benefit the overall system. This is a big assumption that is not proven to be correct, and it follows a little bit input and output dynamic, which is very mechanic. And in social construct or in social structures, like communities or institutions that are supposed to work on child protection issues, this is not the case, and the change doesn't happen in a linear way. We need to understand complexities, and we need to understand what are the interrelationship between the different elements of a system that we work with and we work upon. Here comes the last point of some of those questions, which is, what is our role individually, but above all as organizations? Many of us find ourselves supporting programs in a given context, and we have the expectation of changing a child protection system at the community level or at the national level, or both. As an organization, this is not going to happen simply because we are part of a system and is way bigger than ourselves, and we need to understand how our contribution relate and interact and either consolidate or counterbalance or nullifies the effort of other organizations. We have, in some countries, take Cambodia, 6 or 7 major international organizations working on child protection systems. And each one of us has a different, slightly nuance or a different model to propose at the community level. And we all assume that our model will be replicated by the government because it's such a good model. We need to understand that we are part of a much wider context and of a bigger system. And our intervention, even as Save the Children, which is a strong, big, important organization, is still a relative contribution to the national system. Next slide. Here we are. So these are a bit the conceptual clarifications. I did refer to those. There is a lot of ambiguity in our strategies on what really are we doing around child protection system or system development and strengthening. There is a difference fundamentally between having a systemic approach or a system approach to child protection and working on strengthening a child protection system. Strengthening a child protection system is what we do. So we work on a specific set of elements together with others, trying to improve their functionality. A system approach describes much more an approach, a methodology of work, which describes more how we do things. And if you want, we can go straight to the next slide, which is a diagram that might help looking at the application of system approach to system strengthening. We start from the aspirations, the first dot on the left. Every time that we want to strengthen a child protection system, we have very ambitious goals. We want the child protection system to be perfect. We want the child protection system to be absolutely effective and answer and be able to resolve all issues in children's lives and family lives. And these are our own aspirations of international organizations. They are slightly different, but very similar, probably with the top layer of decision-making people in ministries or in governments where with whom we work. But then there are also the aspirations of communities and families that often are quite different. Now, we need to begin understanding, okay, a system can be very aspirational. It can be have very ambitious goals. However, we need to understand whose perspective are we really supporting, and are we very inclusive in striking a balance between our perspective, the perspective of a given government, and the perspective of local communities and families? Or are we really far away from the reality? Because if we are so far away, that means that there will be question of appropriateness that begin to raise. So We would need to strike a balance with the other dot on the right, which is the normative framework. Where are the communities at? Where are the families at? What are their priorities? Where are they struggling with? And what is their concept and their understanding of how a family is supposed to function, how a community is supposed to function, and how problems are dealt with. This is the reality of everyday life of children and families. That needs to be fully considered when we try to design or imagine an improved system in a given country. So we need to strike a balance. That's why those two dots are connected. And then you see the famous other aspect that is seldom considered at the design or conceptualization phase, which is the resources. What are the available financial resources for services and support to families and children, for prevention and for general support to struggling families? What are the human resources available at the community level as well as the central level? What are the economic possible likely to be available resources in the immediate future? If we don't balance this element with our aspiration and our reality check, then we risk of having a very nicely designed system, but is not plausible because it is absolutely out of the reality. It's not going to see 3,000 social workers to be hired in the next 10 years, because that is not simply not going to happen in any of the countries where we work. And so if we manage to connect these three elements, we are beginning to use a methodology that consider different perspectives, that respect the interrelationship between these three main aspects that do shape international child protection systems. And we begin to observe what are the boundaries, what are what is within and what is without, outside a given system. It is all a question of finding a delicate balance that makes sense to the majority of people in a given context. And this balance will probably not be something that we would be extremely proud of, or that looks like something that we would be super happy as an international organization, because it carries elements of our ambitions and our objectives, but also is balanced with the objectives and ambitions of the local communities. So it will be very different from what is our ideal system. However, it would be a child protection system that is fit for the context. This methodology has been applied to the strengthening of systems in the Pacific, Southeast Asia, and in West Africa. And the most advanced experiences for the moment, Ghana, where they're now rolling out a reform of the system that has been designed on those principles. Next slide, please.
We probably need to, we close, I think we're fairly close. Yeah?
Yes, we are at the end. I think this is really a summary of what I've been saying so far, but maybe turned into a more positive way. What shall we consider? First point is going back to the contextualization, what we mean about it. We need to ground our efforts into the local reality, and we need to root it into the specific sociocultural and socioeconomic context. We need to bring back children and families at the center of the discourse, not only nominally, but effectively, bringing and making sure that their perspective, not only what we like or what they say, but also the things that make us uncomfortable, are fully taken into account. Recognize and respect the local perspective, aspiration, and the strengths they have. Too many times we haven't been able to really build on what exists at community level, because generally speaking, we are afraid of what community do, or because some of the actions that community put in place to respond to violations of children's rights are going clearly in an opposite direction what we would like. But this doesn't mean that everything that is done at the community level is wrong and needs to be avoided. There are incredible resources and capacity to support children and families at the community level, and we are just beginning to uncover this. And this is even more the case in developing countries, and this is also the case in emergencies. So there is plenty to build on. because there is plenty that exists and we totally ignore because we don't know what we are looking for exactly. And we tend to, ignore what really is already there. And we need to keep in mind that to avoid compliance with a global strategy simply, but to keep our program rooted, we really need to keep in mind the outcomes for children and families. So if we ground it, we should be able, into the local reality, we should be able to see some results directly in terms of changes for children and families. Next slide. We need to think about the context and the system design. In specific terms, child protection issues and institutional challenges need to be considered when we want to talk about an improved system. And we need to deal with those institutional challenges. If there are no resources, we need to be able to design a system that works with little resources. There is no excuse. We need to respect existing system and build on what is there. And we need to understand what is Save the Children, in your case, relative position in contributing to the development of this system. I think we have a responsibility to really collaboratively work with all the other organizations and be serious when we talk about systems at the community level. Inevitably needs to link and work in synergy with a national system, and therefore need to be a compromise and understanding how many other organizations are working on those things. We can't have different frames or different models in the same country. So we all have a relative position to play. System design. Does our system design, our model, reflect contextual realities? Does it reflect the local concept of family and community and relationship state-citizen? Does it really reflect, and you can see it into your model, the aspiration of communities and not what we want communities to think? Does it reflect those functional relationships in communities of those people that do detain power? Do we consider those institutional challenges and limitations and opportunities that there are there? And fully considering the capabilities that are there and use those, but also considering the resources limitations. Let's not design something that is waiting for another 50 years before it is implementable. The most important question at the end of the day is that, does it make sense only to me, or it makes sense to the families that it's supposed to serve? That means that a system is presented and speaks a language and responds to the priorities identified by families. And is it a viable system? Can it be replicated at the national level? That is about a bit of economics and understanding how reforms work. Next one, I think we are finished. Almost there? Sorry. Is our program really commensurate to the change we want to bring about? If we're really so ambitious to strengthen a national child protection system, then our program needs to be of the same size, of the same real complexity, and of the same needs to be commensurate to the challenge we have ahead. And probably we wouldn't be able to do it alone. So we need to converge with other actors. Is the program building and complementing on others' efforts, whether it's a community effort, whether it's another organization effort, or are we simply ignoring each other? Are we simply building on the side and creating parallel systems and parallel structures that are detrimental most of the time? And is it a program that is designed to learn? Why we are in this situation probably is that because we haven't been super open about our learning. I know that every organization is doing their own learning, but when we are in the open discussing among different organizations, some of the challenges that we experience are not always fully acknowledged, and therefore the common learning is not always maximized. So that is one of the challenges we want to think about. The next slide, and we conclude. This is a quote from one of the books that really influenced the way Child Frontiers and many of us have been working on child protection system, Gary Cameron and Raymond. it's basically a conclusion, but I came to fully appreciate the meaning of this sentence after many years of working on systems and so on. Every time I look at it, there are more nuances to be understood. And I'll let you to read it and consider it a little bit, and I will pause here. Thank you, and sorry for going so way over the time.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Alex. I think everybody found it so interesting that they were happy to listen. Some, unfortunately, have had to go off, and Alison Sutton, who is the director of Child Protection Global Theme, wanted to know and wanted to send particular apologies. She's in Manila and has been caught up in a meeting there, but she really wanted to attend. So we have run over time, but I'd just like to thank you, Alex, for just a really insightful and challenging presentation. It was as promised, and I think you haven't disappointed in terms of challenging us and raising a number of questions for our child protection systems work. So I don't want to say too much more. I would really like to give participants an opportunity. I know that there are some questions, and so please, I want to leave it open. I hope you won't mind going over a few minutes. I'm suggesting maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if that's okay.
That's fine with me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's my fault.
So yes, any of the participants, please, happy to have you either use the mic or put a question in the message box. Quicker if you use the mic.
Okay, I will start then. My name is Ann Linnarsson, and I'm a director of a civil society strengthening program here in Save the Children LAC, Latin American Caribbean. Well, just to start, my background is I've been working 12 years for child protection in UNICEF, so I'm relatively new to Save the Children. But I wanted to ask a question about the scope of the work of the child protection systems, because I was very happy to hear you, Alex. Well, thank you first for your very interesting and critical analysis of our work, what we are doing. But I was happy that you really mentioned the importance of the local and regional context. And here in Latin America, I feel like the tendency is more, when you talk about child protection system, to talk about system to protect the rights of children, more than to solely talk about protecting children against violence. So governments here tend to more work and to strengthening the whole holistic systems, no more the whole infrastructure to implement the Child Rights Convention. So I wanted to hear a bit from you how your experience has been in other countries or other regions, and maybe also hear from the Save the Children colleagues, how does this affect programming? Because I feel like this space is mainly there's participants from child protection sections, and more than the CRG. Like the Save the Children has these two sections, no, the CRG and the child protection. And here in Latin America, we have created an interagency group between UNICEF, World Vision Plan, and Save the Children to have a declaration that we work towards the same definitions in terms of protection of the rights of children, and even developed a tool of indicators how to measure these systems, and then talk about subsystems of protecting children against violence, or maybe to use the vocabulary of the Child Rights Convention to talk about general measures of implementation and then measures of special protection. So I was interested to hear from you a bit about this, how to articulate these two in your experience, and maybe also from the SAVE colleagues. Thank you. And sorry for the long question.
That's good, thank you. Shall we collect 2 or 3 questions, or we go one by one?
We can collect 2 or 3. So Bill has asked,
okay,
isn't the critique of child protection systems the same critique of international development in general? For example, blueprint models, lack of contextualization, etc. However, the new work on doing development differently is challenging this. What about the positive lessons and achievements of child protection systems work, including a number of the points that Alec has argued are problems. Any further questions? Okay, I would like to ask Alex, I mean, I think this is what we struggle with in Save the Children and other organizations, is how do you actually achieve, I mean, our job is about achieving scale. So how do we do that while at the same time being kind of small, I mean, focusing on the kind of the local context and ensuring that we're being very sensitive to that. I know that, you know, I think some of what you've said, particularly around the strategy being different from the solutions and having to be very aware of that. Maybe that's the answer to that question, but I think that's what we struggle with. We're expected to kind of work at scale, and at the same time we know that if we do that, actually it doesn't necessarily enable us to establish a sensitive system, or a system that's sensitive to the local needs and to children and families, and yet there's enormous pressure on us to do that. I think that's the crux of, in many ways, for me anyway, that's the crux of our dilemma at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so shall I try to address some of these points?
Sure. Thank you.
Really sorry for taking that long. Even at this early in the morning, I talk too much. There is so much, you know, to go through, and Bill probably is right. I will start from there. There is, of course, a clear connection with the critique on how development is done, and the trend that development has gone into, which are very similar to child protection. However, I think it is evident to some of us, at least, and we believe that child protection brought some of those challenges to different levels, and child protection. Look at the experience of child protection emergencies that kept on focusing on creating evidence to inform our programs and so on. And now that we have plenty of evidence in a humanitarian setting on what works and what doesn't work, and we still do the same things. We are unable to adapt. We are unable to learn, basically. And that is the biggest worry for me in child protection, because there is no open, clear debate of what we do greatly, or there is a lot of self-congratulating meetings, if you want. We do great. We all have, every single program has best practices to show, but we have no failures to share. That is a particular challenge of child protection, I guess. And yes, some of the problems are fundamentally rooted in the way international development is done, but doesn't mean that child protection cannot do and operate differently, I believe. And yeah, it's not easy. Absolutely, it's not easy. But also, we work in a very specific sector, as has been raised on, for example, what is the relationship between a much wider sector on a system that is supposed to protect and promote children's rights, and then specific child protection violations. I think in that respect, to me, the context and the national political agenda, if you want, or the context in Latin America is of course very, very different from other regions. But if the priority for government is a rights agenda and having a system that promotes all rights and so on, I would certainly, I mean, that there is not much use to contrast it, of course. And because anyway, is a positive attitude, is a positive way of looking at things, and is a good platform to then go further. And I think I would probably share the same kind of approach that you mentioned of looking at more specific aspect of the rights agenda, and looking at issues of child protection, and if you want, trying to understand. What I would do is certainly look at subsystems and so on within the area of the children's rights agenda, and talking about the violence, or talking about maltreatment and family challenges. So how are these dealt with really within that wider agenda? I mean, systems can be interconnected, can be infinite subsystems and so on. We can theorize things in very different ways. What would be interesting is to understand how social services are organized, and what is their responsibility, what is the expectation of communities and families from social services, and what are the problems that actually are allocated or expected to be dealt with by a more public sector, and not by, I don't know, community dynamics. But certainly I would look at the effort on more specific aspects within the broad agenda. Yes, that is an area that would involve probably more actors than simply child protection actors. But then carving out within that broad discourse specific consideration, specific understanding of saying, okay, when things go wrong, or when things begin to go wrong, before they go wrong, what happens? And how does this system or another subsystem would deal with those aspects? I'm not sure I've answered to your question, but the fact is that we don't have real solutions. I mean, what we can imagine is really adopting an approach, or adopting a stand in front of those things, where we try to find the solutions at within the local context. I would be wary of finding solutions that are fine, that they're okay for every single context, and this to me links to the scale issues. It depends what is the position of every single organization. Jane, I think if Save the Children in a given country works mostly or exclusively at the community level, the issue of scale needs to be there in the conceptualization phase, and understanding what is the position of Save the Children in that given context in relation to an issue like a child protection system. Because whatever you do at the community level must connect and reflect to what happens at the national level. You can't work in isolation. It's a matter of convergence and complementarity of programs, I think. And I think that there is a huge margin of improvement in how our organizations work with others, and increase that dialogue and that common understanding, because from 6 communities, we could potentially influence the way the nation works, as far as we do work on whatever exists, and we converge with others. We can't imagine working in a community and say that we are improving a system. No, we are helping a community, really, if that is all we do. The scale means also really fully understand the institutional bottlenecks, and having that additional capacity to have to go beyond the child protection violations or the situation analysis that we normally see everywhere, but having an understanding of the sociocultural context in relationship to child maltreatment. I talk about child maltreatment because the language is more neutral and is generally understood by all different cultures, whilst child protection is very specific to certain contexts and the international discourse. So I think we can go to scale, but it's a matter of complementarity, is a matter of convergence, and making sure that we do understand that a system, if we have a systemic approach, we understand that there are interrelationships among different levels and elements. And what we change here will have ripple effects in theory. If we look at as an ensemble, as a whole, will have ripple effects on other things.
I think actually just, I mean, what strikes me about all of this is the issue of analysis. It seems to me that there's a huge number of challenges you've posed, and I think over the last few years, Child Frontiers and yourself, Alec, you've posed a number of challenges for us and a number of questions, and I think a lot has been very useful in terms of really helping us kind of think through how we should be going about things in terms of system strengthening or establishment. But it does seem to me that analysis is the kind of key, that we actually need to delve into whatever we're doing in greater depth and really kind of identify what is the traditional means of protecting children, what are the actual, you know, the ways in which families already do it, what does childhood mean, as you say, you know, what does it mean to contextualize as well, because I think, you know, we have understood contextualization as replicating but adapting it a bit so for the local context. Whereas I think a recent discussion I had in China, where in fact we have taken on board much of what, you know, you have advised in terms of actually really identifying what the traditional means of protecting children have been. We've done some research and we've identified, for example, that we've really missed a really important cadre at the community level, a cadre at the street level in China that has traditionally, you know, been the cadre that actually looks out for families and looks out for, and children obviously are part of that, and vulnerability. So we need to really redress that in our system strengthening work. But the other thing that struck me was that in that discussion I was having around, you know, the team kept talking to me about contextualization. I think ultimately it's about grounding. It's grounding the work in that context. And so I think contextualization might be a little bit confusing because it does sound like you can take something and just adapt it. Whereas I think the more we do the kind of bottom up and the more we do that analysis, the more we take that time, it's still, I think all of us are probably still concerned that the expectations on Save the Children from donors, from the organisation itself, is to scale up and to go, and child protection systems are really about scale. And just to say that just to add, Jeffrey has asked the question around that, which is if we were to scale and at the same time contextualize in all locations, then the amount of resources that we will require, you know, are much greater. So. That's a point from Jeffrey. Bill is asking what your actual conclusion is. I hope you're not, and I don't think you're saying that we should abandon child protection systems work. I think you think you're encouraging us to continue with it. That's what I'm hearing you saying, because you're concerned, for example, around other organisations perhaps going back to that issue-based work. And because it really is the way to go, as it were. But I think there's a lot of work to be done on thinking about how we do it is the important thing in doing that analysis. Sorry, just to add, Anne is asking, what about other colleagues from SAVE? Are we only programming child protection systems as protection from violence, or seeing it more broadly as CRG? I think we have to see child protection. Sorry, I will leave that open. Does anybody else want to answer that question? Bill is saying that it's Latin Americans' perspective to talk about protection systems as integrated rights systems, protecting all children's rights. And I think we're due to have a learning event in Asia in October, and one of the things we're looking at and discussing at the moment is the role of CRG in all of this, and where we can actually, you know, include our CRG colleagues in some elements of consideration of child rights governance. And of course, at the end of the day, we recognise that if countries were actually complying with the CRC, then we wouldn't have an issue with child protection. But I think in general, we are actually working with child protection as opposed to child rights, and I think it's that focus that we have in Save the Children.
Right.
Anybody else want to add? We probably ought to finish. It is 9:30 my evening, but it's morning for others and afternoon for those of you in the UK, etc. Any last points before we probably need to close up?
Well, I don't know if this is the space, but I thought it was interesting the discussion on SAVE's role and contribution. Here in Latin America, UNICEF has a lot of resources and are really working very closely with governments to create or strengthen or scale up in child protection systems. So it would be interesting to have a discussion on SAVE's role that often doesn't have as much resources, but very many added values that could. So this discussion on contributions, because we are all contributing, no? But we have to do it in a coordinated and manner, no? And to be complementary. I think it could be interesting, but I don't know if there's time or there will be another opportunity.
I mean, just a quick response to that. I mean, I do think sometimes we feel like we're establishing the system out there, and yet at the same time we are actually part of that system because we are involved in it as Save the Children. So I think that is the point. Anyway, I do think we have to finish here, and I'd really like to thank everybody on the call, but particularly Alex at 7:30 in the morning now, but thank you so much, and thanks for being part of this kind of journey with us, because that's what it feels like. We've got a fair bit to go, but I think it's good to ask the questions, and I hope people felt that, you know, that questioning is and these challenges are what is going to take us forward, even if it feels like just, you know, something to that we really have to consider, that can feel like it will hold us back a little bit. But I think it's better to have to do that analysis, to actually, you know, think about things and take the time and get it right, because if we do things the way we perhaps are sometimes tempted to do or have been doing, then we can set up systems that aren't really working to protect children. And given that that's what we want to do, I think it is important to take some time, step back a little bit, and give it all some thought. So yeah, Sylvia is just adding that we will continue, obviously, in the task group, the Child Protection Systems task group on the Child Protection Systems community of practice to discuss all these issues. And just to say that this will be recorded, so you can either listen to it again or tell your colleagues. Give your colleagues the link, and we will be sharing the link in any way, in any case. But thanks so much, everybody, and thank you particularly, Alex, for all that work and all that time, and for all the questions and challenges that you're leaving us with. Thank you.
Well, thank you. If anyone wants to reach out to have continue some lateral discussions and so on, you're very welcome to do so. And yeah, just to confirm, I'm not suggesting you should drop a systems focus. I think is one of the few opportunities we have to get it right. And absolutely, there is ample room to get it to make a difference. So yeah, let's continue the discussion. Thank you for having this opportunity to reflect with you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good day, those of you that still have the day ahead of you.
And good night to you.
Bye.